Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tiff Talks Tech. Today, I want to start with something that I hear consistently from both sides in our industry. On-site teams are always saying corporate has no idea how much work we actually do, and that's fair. And corporate teams are constantly saying on-site does not realize how much happens behind the scenes, which I've also personally felt. Both are valid, both are right. But instead of acknowledging that, we have turned this into somewhat of a quiet war, a war of resentment, of assumptions, and a war where everyone feels overworked and underrecognized. And that's why today we are going to be talking about the invisible work tension between on-site and corporate teams, why it exists, how tech has made it a little bit worse, and what we can do to fix it. So jump in with me. This is going to be a solo episode. Before we really dive in, I want to just set the stage for you. Invisible work is the labor that no one sees, no one tracks it or rewards it, but everyone is dependent on it, right? Especially in multifamily, it is everywhere. On-site teams are drowning in interruptions all the time, emotional labor, resident issues, tech workarounds, constantly trying to figure that out, and compliance tasks that do not show up in reports as something that is measurable. On the flip side, corporate teams are juggling strategy, vendor management, budgeting, ownership pressure, risk mitigation, and rollouts that could fall apart any moment that they leave their office. So they're also juggling quite a bit. And each side often believes that the other one has it easier. I remember I would constantly hear, oh, well, you have it nice in your little office up at corporate. When I worked on the operations side, which little did everyone know, I had also worked on site as well. So I understood what it was like. And while it does sound nice sometimes, it's also very different and it can be stressful in just a different way. But that belief that one side has it easier than the other, it's costing us adoption, trust, and retention in our roles. So first, let's dive into kind of the on-site side. On-site work, it's not just leasing, right? Like they're not just giving out apartments. They are doing so many things. So let's dive into some of the things that on-site has to deal with. They're constantly translating corporate strategy into a daily action. They have to implement everything that corporate says is important, right? They also have to explain policy decisions that they don't normally have a hand in. So they might have an unhappy resident coming in and they're upset because of a process that they didn't have any control over, but they have to be the one to implement it. They have to try to keep the peace, try and keep people happy so that they don't blame them. And they're managing that on a daily basis. They're also an emotional buffer between residents, vendors, leadership, everybody. So you have that on your plate. Teams are also dealing with broken technology, things that are not integrating properly, things that come up on a daily basis that they might not even realize, but they just kind of have to work through and come up with a workaround. They might just be told to put in a ticket and they're sitting there twiddling their thumbs for something that they really need to work right now. And then lastly, they're in charge of, selling, leasing those apartments, customer service, making sure everyone's happy, compliance, and even tech support. Like I said, sometimes things are not working and they have to fix that and they have to do all of this simultaneously. And here's the key part. A lot of that, most of it, it's not measurable. So a CRM, it might track your leads. A PMS might track occupancy, but it's not going to track the 17 interruptions that happened right before lunch. It's not going to track the resident conversation that you had that prevented a bad review from happening. It doesn't track the workaround that you created because a tool did not match the reality of what they said it was going to. So when corporate looks at the dashboard and they say, well, why isn't this tool being used on site? You're failing, you're not doing your job, but not really accounting for all the things that are happening behind the scenes. And that's just, at the point where they're barely surviving. On the flip side, let's talk about corporate. Corporate sounds clean and cushy and fun. And let me tell you, I have worked both. You have meetings, you're putting together decks, you're working on strategy, decisions. But behind that, there is pressure from ownership to cut costs while doing more and improving performance. Do more with less, they're always saying, but how? You're going to have to do it in corporate. So that's actually the trade-off. It could be a smaller team. I mean, oftentimes marketing teams, operations teams, they're a little bit smaller, especially in our industry. I remember working on a 2-person team for 70 plus properties and having to do everything 70 times. It all adds up. There's so much going on. Vendor contracts that look good in theory, but they fail in practice, and kind of keeping track of what you're using. Any data gaps that make decision making feel like an educated guess because you just don't have the information to be able to tell if something is working or not. We have rollouts that depend entirely on behavior that you don't control. And I recently did an episode about failed rollouts. So if you want to go back to that, that's an interesting listen. But we kind of talk about what the anatomy of a good rollout is and why they tend to fail so often. And again, that's something that corporate has to deal with. And then also being blamed for tools that you have nothing to do with. You didn't build it, but sure, maybe you put your name behind it. You didn't know it wasn't going to work a certain way on site. So, those are outcomes that you didn't foresee happening. How are you to know because you're not on the property on a daily basis using it? How are you supposed to know that these little bumps in the road may come up? Corporate teams really carry the weight of scale as well. Like I said, you might be most of the time over multiple properties, and trying to do something times however many properties you have. It is a big burden. And in corporate, the decisions affect hundreds of employees, thousands of residents, millions of dollars oftentimes. So that's just a lot of pressure that's invisible to onsite teams that they're not really seeing that corporate has to deal with. So when onsite says, why would corporate do this? Why is corporate pushing this one product or thing for us to do? Well, corporate's hearing, you don't know what you're doing. And so they're over here thinking they're getting this pushback and nobody really trusts what they have to say. So they could often just be trying to protect the business, but feeling like it's not really working for them. Let's talk about how tech is making this even worse sometimes. Tech, it was supposed to reduce the workload. As we know, it's supposed to take a lot of the burden off of teams, but a lot of the time it just ends up redistributed and no one's really recognizing that shift. Corporate sees, oh, hey, this is some automation that's going to make your life easier. Onsite sees, here's an extra step you have to take. And corporate may see reporting, but onsite, they're experiencing more clicks and not knowing what to do with them. Corporate, they may see some standardization, a whole process put into place, but onsite, they're experiencing more rigidity and having, in their mind, less freedom to do things the way that they're used to. And no one really names that that's a trade-off, but it is happening all the time. And so the two kind of become resentful of each other. Onsite starts to feel like they're being surveilled and watched really closely, and it makes them tense. And then corporate feels like they're just being ignored instead of partnered with. And that can be a reason why adoption fails a lot of the time, not because we have bad tools, but often because the invisible work is not being accounted for and we're not recognizing it. So the real problem is not necessarily respect, it's more translating and understanding each other. Most people do respect each other, but understanding that's very different. Corporate, they don't always see on-site work unless it's broken or something's going wrong. So they don't a lot of times see what's going right. And then on-site doesn't see corporate's work unless it's impacting them negatively most of the time and causing more work for them. So tech can really become that battleground where the misunderstandings start to play out. I remember specifically there was one time when I was early in my career and I was over marketing and training, and we had mystery shops. And I remember there was this one property that got a mystery shop and the score wasn't great. So I had to put together the evaluation and I sent it over to the property. I'm trying to be as delicate as I possibly can. If you know me, I couldn't be berating to anybody. So I'm over here like, hey, this is what happened. And here's what we could potentially improve. Let's take these classes, blah, 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 whatever. Okay, great. That goes through. And within like 5 minutes, I have a phone call screaming in my ear of just, how can you say this? You think we're not doing our job? You think we don't know what we're doing? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there again, early in my career. So I'm just stunned and don't really know what to say. And I'm just kind of starting to get the rising emotion. I want to cry. And so I'm like, hey, I go over to my boss. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this call. It just came in and um they're kind of saying it's on me. And so I remember, took over and I had the opportunity to see how she handled that. But if I go back to see where things broke there, I can see that at the time it was hard to understand her point of view. All I knew was I was getting yelled at over something I didn't even control. I wasn't conducting the mystery shop. But in reality, I could see that the manager probably felt like we were calling them a failure, where they were a tax credit community. They didn't have anything to lease. They couldn't follow all the steps to a T. And so it's understandable that they couldn't go through with the entire process that corporate had put in place. And so we needed to have a little bit more flexibility, more understanding. But again, maybe not calling and yelling at the poor marketing assistant that's in charge of it. But I understand it. I understand the frustration now and I get where they're coming from. A lot of times we just keep asking, why aren't they using this thing that we put in place that we have designed to make their processes better? Or why haven't they rolled out this tool that we think is very important? But instead of asking those things, let's think about what work did that create for them that we didn't exactly plan for or think about? What work did it remove and from who? And then we can kind of start to put those things together and have a better conversation around that. So, what is actually going to fix this disconnect? How do we stop this invisible work war? It's not going to be with an empathy workshop, I'll tell you that. And it's not going to be with another rollout checklist. It's actually going to be with visibility and shared ownership between the two. It's more common communication and understanding on the two sides and just being open to that. Here's a few mindset shifts that are extremely important in this atmosphere. First of all, we want to keep in mind that every tech rollout creates change. If Onsite is absorbing more work, we need to acknowledge that and let's offset it with something else. Second, adoption is a lot of work. It costs you labor and learning, changing habits, adapting to those workflows. It's work. So treat it that way and understand that there's going to be a curve there. Third, metrics, they should reflect effort and not just the outcome. So like I said, there's so many different things that cannot be measured in a number. And if you're only measuring those results, you're going to miss the work that made those results possible. We also want to think about on-site insight is strategy and not necessarily feedback on what you're doing wrong. If they are living the friction, they should be able to influence the solution as well and take that feedback. I know even myself personally, I can say I can be sensitive to feedback sometimes and thinking, hey, this is an attack on me. It's not. It could just be the product. It could just be the process. And maybe there's some tweaks we need to see along the way. And then lastly, corporate context really builds trust faster than enforcing something and saying you have to do this thing. Let's explain the why behind it and not just what they're going to be doing. So in closing, that invisible work war, it's not about one side or the other being lazy. It's not about putting up resistance. And it's definitely not about one of the sides being out of touch and just uncooperative. It's about an industry that keeps adding systems and tools without honoring the humans who make them work. When we make that invisible work visible, we don't just fix adoption. We fix an entire culture within the workplace. And that's when tech can finally do what it promised it would when we allow that to happen. So thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. I hope this helped. I hope it was helpful to at least recognize the problem that we so often see and at least put words to it and hopefully gave you some ideas on how to fix things within your own company and culture. Subscribe for more episodes and follow me on LinkedIn to stay up to date with the latest Tiff Talks Tech episodes.